The harder the conflict, the greater the triumph.
A fiercest serpent may be overcome by a swarm of ants.
Lead me, follow me, or get out of my way. Age wrinkles the body, quitting wrinkles the soul.
Battle buddies.
Battle buddies.
War. What is it good for?
Have you seen the Boy Meets World version of that?
I sent that to you.
Oh, you sent it to me.
Is it not great?
Yeah, I had forgotten all about it.
I remember watching that as a kid, thinking, is it Ben Savage or Fred Savage? It's one of the Savages.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Turns out, war. What is it good for? Maybe some things, as we will find out today.
Hot take.
Yes, maybe some things. Though again, I hold our stance that we are anti-war.
Not fans of it.
Right. Does that mean we are going to go out and hold signs in front of the recruiting office? Not necessarily. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been 2 weeks.
It's been a long time.
We took a break.
I took a break.
Yeah, I, the royal we.
The royal we.
You went to Oregon. I have been doing schoolwork. I get to apply for graduation next month.
Hey, congratulations.
Thank you. So we are back. It feels good to be back.
It feels good.
I was getting some itches.
I think the hardest part for me lately is I want to text you something funny, and I'm like, nope, I got to wait for when we do our podcast. And so then I'm just sitting there not talking.
Yeah, this is good material. Don't waste it. Don't waste it on it. It's a bit, yes. Yeah, so here today we are on what I think we're going to call a hip pocket report, where I go into a book that I just recently read, which is War, How Conflict Shaped Us by Margaret MacMillan. Now, typically, Kevin and I like to deep dive into very specific moments in history with battles, but today we're going to be at a bird's eye view talking very broad.
That's cool.
Broad stuff. Broad strokes.
Yeah.
Broad. So I'm going to kind of just go chapter by... There was only 9 chapters, and I'm going to go chapter by chapter and talk about some of the concepts that this author brings up. I definitely think this is a good place to start because it is very... it's a recent... But I think it was published in 2020, and it's super broad, like I said. So
What's this lady doing?
She's a historian.
That's
yeah,
cool.
I believe she teaches in Toronto. She went to Oxford.
I recognize the name of that place.
It's a place that is renowned. When you say it, people go, oh.
I think Frasier went to Oxford.
Really?
In the fictional character Frasier.
Did
I
he?
think so.
No shit?
I don't know. Maybe Harvard. Who cares? This is one of the... Whatever the most pretentious answer is the one that he went to for writing.
Email us.
Yeah, let us know.
BattleBuddiesPod@gmail.com.
Niles is the only one that matters.
Dude, Niles is my guy.
He's the guy.
There's an episode where he tries to get on an elevator, and he's got, what is that called when you are dizzy?
Vertigo.
Thank you. And it's the physical comedy is the spice melange.
It's
of
so good.
Physical comedy.
What about when the Valentine episode, when
it's
he
a classic.
lights his pants on fire
It's a
and
classic.
passes out? Oh, God, so good.
Maybe we should just make this podcast about Frasier.
The Frasier podcast? I'm super down.
I'm sure there's
Hannah
not,
will still listen.
I'm sure there's not already 20 podcasts about Frasier. We did an episode by episode listing of Frasier. So, here we are. War. How Conflict Shaped Us by Margaret MacMillan. I want to start off by kind of just saying, since we're in the topic of broad strokes, what does war mean to us? What do you think? When you think of war, where does your mind go?
Well, it's really interesting because it used to be just where people kill each other for fun, I imagine. And then as I've been reading all these stupid books, I'm on the Clausewitz stuff right now where he's just saying...
How is that?
Sorry?
How's that going?
I'm not past the essays that you read before to understand Clausewitz, because they're like, if you don't read these closely, you won't understand what's going on. but I don't really understand what's going on in the essay. So we're going to have to do it book by book, which will be fine.
Okay.
Because there's like 7 books or something. I don't know.
Okay. So it's dense,
It's
is what
dense.
you're telling me.
But his whole thing is that war is political. It's like just politics, just enacted in a different way. And that really has been blowing my mind with all the conflicts we've been looking at lately. Like, it's just politics. It's a continuation of politics. It's on the spectrum of politics, which makes me feel better when I say, fuck war. Because I also say, fuck politics. Like, they're all stupid. But that's what they do. A loud little notice that we just got, like pop-up notice.
Is that going to come through, do you think?
No, it won't come through.
Okay, well, we heard it. There's going to be some Clausewitz quotes that I bring up, and as a matter of fact, I think some of it has to specifically do with the politics of war.
I really hope she misquoted it, because that's what one of the essays really goes into. It's like
misquoting?
Well, it's just like, everyone loves to quote Clausewitz, but no one likes to read Clausewitz.
Dude, that's going to make you feel so good, Kevin. Right? Yeah, no, I read it. Okay. So the intro of the book discusses how Western education, typically in college, steer away from the study of war and focus on history from more of a social and political point of view. The author argues that perhaps this is because folks in the education field fear that they may be perceived as glorifying past acts of war. I
do fear that.
Okay. Well, yeah, and that's going to be a huge argument that this author makes with more concepts that we approach. But I think it's an interesting concept that professors are steering away from war in school, considering there's never a time on Earth that war is never not happening.
Right.
It is an inalienable truth. Like, it's always going to be happening.
Yeah.
I think, like, when my mind thinks of like the Book of Revelation, and they're like, the world will end when there's rumors of war. And it's like, oh, so forever.
All the time.
Yeah.
Wait, so is that like, is she trying to equate that, not like on the same level, but like similar to like the argument against like being colorblind? Like, you can't say that race doesn't exist, because race absolutely exists. There's a whole history involved with it.
Shit.
I'm ready for these hard-hitting. I've been listening to a lot of like Steve Dubner on Freakonomics, like those hard-hitting questions.
I say shit not because that's like a hard question to answer. I just feel like we're gonna go down a path that is. Well, I'm curious to hear what your opinion is on this. I think that we live in sensitive times.
Yes.
Okay. That's a good.
I've been writing an intro to the Vietnam War and really struggling with it, because I'm like, I don't want everyone to hate us after, just half the people.
So imagine being a professor who is teaching these kids who are getting the majority of their social and political information from the internet, which is a sludge of fucking disgrace most of the time. So do you think a professor is going to be like, today we're going to talk about the Vietnam War, and someone in the back is like, fuck Vietnam? You know what I mean? Like, right. I don't know. So I think her argument, or the point that she's just trying to make, is war is probably something that has to be tiptoed around a little bit these days, and is a touchy subject, which, as you and I fully understand, kind of diving into within the next couple of weeks, we're going to be diving into Vietnam. And like, when I told my father-in-law, he was like, ooh, you're probably going to be opening some old wounds there. And you and I are going to have to preface our episode with, like, we're not going to be sitting here trying to make fun of anything. Like, jokes will happen, obviously, but we completely understand that it's a huge, serious thing that has affected people's lives who are alive today.
Yes.
We're not talking about Thermopylae and being like, they used to bang each other. Like, this is a little bit different. So, fully understand the sensitivity of it, and we're going to try to approach it as such.
Yeah, we have stuff.
Okay. Anywho, chapter 1 is called Humanity, Society, and War. So it really goes out to question, why do human beings kill each other? How do we get to that point At what point does violence constitute the proper classification of war? Is tribalism to blame? Do we have biological imperatives that make us want to side with an ideal and cling to a group of people to make us feel like a participant in the goings-on of things around us? MacMillan argues that humanity got good at waging war once we got good at being an organized society. So I kind of want us to pause and just think about that for a second. Why do we kill each other, right?
So she's saying, like, early tribes people, when we're nomadic, they're fighting over like resources, so it's more of like a skirmish. And then as we progress and centralize and become agrarian, then we're going to develop more like formal war. Is that kind of the idea there?
So these are all my questions.
Oh, okay.
I have some things here that I'm going to be reading directly from the book, but these are things that I'm wanting the listener and you to kind of ponder before I like start quoting her.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So here I'll start kind of quoting some of the things that she says here. So the challenges that ask us why it is that human beings are willing and able to kill each other. It is more than an intellectual puzzle. If we do not understand why we fight, we have little hope for avoiding future conflicts. So far, there are many theories, but no agreed answers. Perhaps war is the result of greed or competition for dwindling resources, for food, territory, sexual partners, or slaves. Or are we shaped by biological ties and shared culture to value our own groups, whether clans or nations, and fear others? Like our cousins, the chimpanzees, do we instinctively lash out when we feel threatened? It's pretty cool. She kind of goes on a little tangent here and talks about Jane Goodall and how prior to going and living amongst chimpanzees, she wrote a hypothesis that basically said she thought that chimpanzees and bonobos were going to be way more peaceful than human beings.
Oh, yeah.
Turns out,
no,
not at all. As a matter of fact, chimpanzees can also have like cold wars.
Oh, really?
They can mistakenly perceive that another group of chimpanzees is going to be doing something that they're not doing. And act out in a way of trying to prevent something that is made up in their own minds.
That's crazy.
That is crazy, but it's something that we do.
Yes.
Right. All right.
This is like when your wife doesn't argue with you, but then like loudly does the dishes. You're like, I fucked up real bad. I had to figure this one out.
Yes, loudly does the dishes. I like that because we've all been there.
We're not perfect here.
No. Let's get into Karl von Clausewitz.
Yeah.
In one of his most famous observations, he said, quote, "War is an act of violence intended to compel our opponent to fulfill our will," end quote. War has a purpose, whether it is offensive or defensive. As with individuals or gangs, fighting war can be about honor, survival, or control. But it is distinguished from a bar fight by its scale and its organization. I think that goes without saying, right? Not all acts of violence have to be considered a war.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Because that's one of Clausewitz, that goes on to another one of his points of like, war has to have like an objective. And then you think of Vietnam and you're like, this doesn't work anymore. And so like, it like really falls apart, and like not in that Vietnam wasn't a war, but it was never a war we were going to win if you look at Clausewitz's definitions.
So I misspoke and I said that there was a quote about Clausewitz saying that war is political, but I have a quote here from Hedley Bull, who is a English political theorist, and he said that violence is not war unless it is carried out in the name of a political unit. Equally, violence carried out in the name of a political unit is not war unless it is directed against another political unit.
Whoa.
Does that sound like something Clausewitz would say as well?
Yeah, so what happened, when we'll get into this in Clausewitz, it's like a big deal with it. It's why I think he's still being used all the time. He was in the middle of like revising all of his books, and then he died of like cholera or something. And so it's like largely unfinished, but like that's kind of what he was getting at when he was revising it. It was like these higher order thinking about war as like political strategies, and like so people like to carry on that idea into whatever direction they want to go. So he's very malleable in that way.
What is his original? What is his? How did he start out? Like, what was his? Was he a professor, a philosopher?
No, so he's this Prussian dude, and he, I guess, was an officer from a very young age, like probably how it had to be back then, and then just became like this student of a couple like famous military theorists, and then just like really got into that, and then just started writing and didn't stop until he died.
Got it.
Yeah.
So he just became a nerd.
He's a huge nerd.
War nerd.
War nerd.
So one of the many paradoxes of war is that humans got good at it when they created organized societies.
Okay.
We're going to get into a lot more of that when we compare Thomas Hobbes and Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Yeah.
Indeed, the two developments have evolved together. War, organized purposeful violence between two political units, became more elaborate when we developed organized sedentary societies, and it helped to make those societies more organized and powerful. I think the idea here is that, and we're going to get into it in the future with some of these chapters, but things like the Industrial Revolution obviously helped things like war.
Right.
It obviously helped things like civilians back at home, getting jobs, and having Henry Ford create things like the assembly line and yada, yada.
You know, it's interesting, like that guy's quote about it has to be a political unit targeted towards another political unit, because the wiggle room there is what we see abused all the time, whereas that other political unit only has to be perceived as a political unit by the first. So you could say, like, that's like the whole othering thing, right? Like I could say, like, people in Afghanistan are bad, and then so like now they are this political unit that's bad, even though like they're a mixture. Things are more complicated than that. But that doesn't negate, like, that still works within that framework that guy put out. I think that's a pretty good.
You're jumping
framework.
ahead, Kevin.
Sorry. I haven't read the book. I just thinking.
But no, you're onto something there for sure. I mean, even think about, what was that Netflix show that terrified?
Stranger Things. Almost.
Yeah, Stranger Things. Thank you. You're an ass. What's that show? The about make believe, the
web of make believe.
Yeah, that.
Woo.
Okay,
Listeners.
So right, is that a political unit?
Yeah.
Right. So if you don't, okay, we're going to. I'm jumping ahead of ourselves, but we're going to get into that in the future. Okay.
Pause.
So, do you know Steven Pinker?
No.
He wrote Enlightenment Now. He's a huge. I want to say he's a neuroscientist, but I don't want to get it wrong. So pause while I type his name into this web browser so I don't get it wrong.
I'm not going to pause. That way everyone can know that Spencer's not, at this moment, a neuroscientist.
He is a cognitive psychologist, psycholinguist, and popular science author. Okay? And his whole point that he likes to discuss is that we are currently living in the most peaceful time in comparison to... Yeah. So would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
At least us in this room, right? We have it pretty fucking made in the shade.
Yeah, life looks okay.
Yeah, life
from
looks
right
great.
here. Yeah, he basically says, like, if you compare what's going on right now to the past, we have things like modern medicine,
right?
The internet, air conditioning. The list goes on, folks.
Laws that can be enforced.
Yeah, Amazon.com.
Huge. I was looking at Pokemon toys today.
Were you?
Yeah.
For yourself or for your kids?
For my kid. He was like throwing a
Are you
ball.
lying to me?
He was throwing a ball and he's like, it's a Pokeball. And I was like, is this sad? Do I need to get him a Pokeball?
No, that's tight.
Okay.
The best time for a father to be like, I get to like Pokemon. All right. So this author says, even if Pinker is right and the debate goes on, it somehow does not seem very reassuring. Those of us who have enjoyed the long peace since 1945 need to reflect that much of the world, including Indochina, Afghanistan, the Great Lakes District in Africa, and large parts of the Middle East, has seen and still sees a shit ton of conflict. A long-running project at Uppsala University in Sweden estimates that between 1989 and 2017, over 2 million people died as a result of war. Since 1945, perhaps 52 million have been forced to flee because of conflict. So that's kind of the thing. I listened to her have an interview on a podcast, and somebody was saying, well, we haven't done anything like World War II, and, life is good, and this and that and the other thing.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, yeah, but Afghanistan lasted 20 years,
Right.
and Iraq wasn't great, and those all were not just the United States being involved. I mean, while I was there, I saw Georgians, I saw British people were with us. Saw a lot of folks from Europe chilling with us. So I don't know. That's got some mad, not necessarily World War vibes,
Right.
but an international endeavor.
Absolutely.
And then if you look at everything going on in the Middle East with Syria, it's not great. And like she just said, 52 million people have been forced to flee. So that completely changes the outlook of what the planet looks like because of war.
I know, because I can't tell you how many essays I read on like the diaspora of like, Jewish people, and then thinking about reading, like, I haven't read all the essays on the diaspora of the 50 other million people who have left very recently. Like, our grandchildren are going to be writing and reading and trying to understand what has happened in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
Because we won't understand it in our lifetime.
Right.
It's going to be, the ripples are going to be too big.
I am beyond curious and almost, excited by the time that my daughter gets to middle school and high school, and I'm really curious to straight up read out of her history textbooks what the war in Afghanistan looks like in that textbook, how it was written.
That will be interesting.
And then see how it's written when my son is in middle school.
You're assuming they'll have new textbooks within 10 years?
Is that not a thing?
It's bold wish.
Okay. Great.
Would be nice.
All right. So that's
I was kidding. I'm sure they
little peek into our California education system, folks. All right. Let's talk about the difference between Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Thomas Hobbes. I have a bunch of long-winded quotes here, but I kind of have narrowed it down to 2 sentences on how to compare the two, which I think most people will appreciate.
Yeah.
So Jean-Jacques Rousseau's take on war and humanity is that humans were all fine and dandy until society corrupted them.
Okay.
All right, so humans were born great, everything was fine, society was created, and fucked us.
Okay.
Verbatim, that's what he said.
Yeah.
Okay. Thomas Hobbes, on the other hand, said that humans were a mess from the beginning, and then society kept them under control.
Okay.
Legitimately, like, conversely to what? Okay. So, which one do you think that we wound up with? Do you think that we started off great and then society ruined us, or do you think that we were a disaster and then society calmed us down?
Like, what am I measuring it against is my thing. Like,
your own experience.
Yeah, like against modern society that I'm living in now.
Yeah. Well, you're obviously, that's the only thing that you're going to be able to.
It makes it like so challenging. Like, well, I feel pretty civilized right now, so like I feel like I had to have been crazier back then. But back then I'd be like, I'm pretty civilized right now. Like, we have an aqueduct. It's dope.
Right. The punk rock in me wants to say that society corrupted us.
Yeah, it sounds way more metal.
It does.
And it's way more fun.
Yeah. She argues that Hobbes is what we're living in, that society 100% keeps us in line.
Does it have to be a one? Like, I feel like it's a both and thing. Like,
Yeah, well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I like that. Like I said, I do have a bunch of long-winded quotes here, but we have an entire book that I'm going through here, so. But
we don't need to get bogged down into the Hobbes, Rousseau.
It's a big one. That's all. I just wanted to hear which theory do you agree with, because she says that she thinks that Hobbes, based off of like archaeological and historical evidence, that Hobbes is kind of where we wound up.
So wait, Hobbes is saying we were cool.
No, other way around. So we were a disaster and society has kept us under control.
Oh, okay.
Whereas Rousseau is like, we were all fine and dandy until society had to come and ruin it all.
Oh, okay.
That, I don't know, 19-year-old Spencer would be like, Rousseau all the way.
Yeah.
That's, when I'm going through my quarter life crisis,
Right.
I'm like, fuck society, bro. And then I joined the Marine Corps because I love authority. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
What a walking oxymoron, contradiction. So that's chapter 1. That's pretty much essentially in a nutshell,
Cool. She's setting the field.
Humanity, society, and war, folks.
These are the questions we should think about while we read the rest of her book.
Yep.
Okay.
Hey, well, because of this episode, you don't need to read the book.
That's nice.
How nice of us. I go out and read a book so you don't have to.
I won't read this book.
Yeah, you don't. You don't need to. Just listen to
I'll
this
just
episode.
listen to this episode again.
Yeah. And download Anchor. Chapter 2, Reasons for War. Got a million reasons. Got a million. Who sings that?
I don't know what song you're singing.
Oh.
I liked it though.
Yeah, you
Vibing
were grooving to the vibe. Okay. So in the Middle Ages, war could be waged for basically any reason. Most wars were waged due to expanding land and making sure certain families stayed in power and making sure there were heirs to the empire. There are apparently many different reasons for wars in different times and places. There's pick your favorite and pick your which one you want. You got abductions, you got romances, religion, dynastic struggles, conquest, imperialism, assassinations, or other fabrications. Yet certain motives appear again and again: greed, self-defense, emotions, and ideas. If we look at recent history, I would argue the United States went to war with Iraq and Afghanistan emotionally.
Yeah, right?
Wouldn't you say so?
It's so hard because it's so wrapped up. Like, there's so many layers. And, like, I'm not, like, a conspiracy theorist, but clearly some people also wanted some things like oil at the same time.
So you're saying greed.
But I'm saying, like, greed is like but, like, if I had to choose a dominant one, yeah, I think it was an emotional reaction. And people saw, like, political clout to be gained. And, like, it was going to bolster and strengthen because, like, war hawks literally believe that war bolsters, like, national identity. And it kind of does sometimes. It's not the most inappropriate thing.
We're going to get into nationalism, which is a lot of these concepts are going to be good for us to all know as you and I get deeper and deeper and deeper into battles, specifically Vietnam.
Not a fan of Vietnam.
Anti.
Not Vietnam, the place.
No. Pro-Vietnam.
Pro-Vietnam.
Anti-war with Vietnam.
Great friends that are from Vietnam.
Yes. Vietnam is a wonderful place, I've heard. Yeah. I don't know. I think of emotions because I can just imagine George W. being like, he tried to kill my dad, Rummy.
Yeah.
He tried to kill my dad. We got to go Rivaderci or Correcto.
Because it has to be emotion when you look at, like, the national consent to it, because it's not like in the Middle Ages when it's just the king just says,
right,
it's time to go. And the way they got us all fired up was emotions. Whether that's right or wrong is not what we're saying here. We're saying is that's how they did it. Because no one looked very hard at the reports on weapons of mass destruction. Like no one's like they didn't do that on purpose. And so now when we became adults and can read and we're like, what? What was that report? That's like a bunch of, I could have wrote that. Like, that's bad.
That's a whole nother ball of wax.
But like, it clearly
dude.
wasn't a logical defense. What I'm saying
Correct.
is like, it was not a defensive war. And no one that was in a seat of power at that time that was influencing national identity was clearly saying like, this is absolutely a logical defensive strategy. This is instead an emotional reaction.
I mean, I agree with what you just said. I always asked other service members while I was in who were in during before 9/11 and during 9/11, and I always asked them like, where were you?
Yeah.
And then how did you feel? Because you obviously have to be fucking terrified if you join the Marine Corps in 98 and you're like, woo!
Yeah, right.
This is so chill. I'm going to Hawaii and just training for shit that's never going to happen.
Yeah, because you would have skipped the Persian Gulf, the Gulf War,
yeah,
right?
yeah. That was like early 90s.
Yeah, you're cruising.
And that lasted 3 months.
Yeah.
And so you're chilling. And then all of a sudden you see the planes hit the towers. And then Craig Schultz comes out in his underwear and he's like, this means war. We're going to war. And he was right. He was hella right.
He called it.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know, that's my daddy. But and so whenever I asked them, how did you feel? The answer was always anger.
Yep.
Like obviously fear was in there too, but just like, man, I was kind of pissed off.
Yeah. Did they say at who? Like at everything, or like at?
You gotta imagine
perceived
the
enemies?
last time that something like that happened, right? Was Pearl Harbor,
Right.
So yeah, you feel as though someone's attacking your homeland,
And so you want it to be like, it would be nice if it was like such an organized group as like the Kaigun operating in Japan. Like, yep, it's literally every single Japanese national, like to the man.
That's what makes this shit really convoluted and stupid. Is that it was the Saudis who ran the planes in the buildings, and they're like, "Let's go to Iraq."
Right.
It's like, I don't understand. Neither do we. Let's go. Anyway. Suspicions and fears of others from rival gangs to countries can create perceptions of threats even when they might not exist, just as they do for our cousins, the chimpanzees, as I mentioned earlier. This here is kind of what I think. I mean, we actually just kind of dove into it a little bit with the whole Iraq war and perceiving things that weren't necessarily there. But I mainly think about the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis and those 13 days that we were just waiting around to see if something was going to happen, and then nothing did. And then we still today live in a perceived war with a lot of different powers. Which one comes to your mind when you think of like a perceived, holy shit, these people might be our enemy? And it again, they don't necessarily need to be, but based off of the way that this information might be portrayed to the masses, where does your mind go?
Right. Because I was going to say, because it's just like what we were just talking about with the war in Iraq. Like, I'm not making judgment calls on any of it. Like, I'm just saying that's how I really do feel like in retrospect it was an emotional reason. But yeah, right now, obviously, we're seeing Russia still as the enemy. And then China, it's all like hella confusing because like when I listen to anything that is like not economics related, it's like so dangerous. Like they are so corrupted and evil. And then like anything economics, they're just as silly as us. Like they do things differently and kind of scary sometimes, but like they're hella silly with how they control financial markets like we are. And so that's more of like, I guess, refreshing because it's like, oh, the world is more complicated than I thought.
Yeah. It's one thing that you and I have come to learn from all this podcasting is nuances.
Nuances.
Lots of nuances. There's never just a simple answer, is there?
Just straight up contradictions that you have to just live with.
My dad was a history major, and I remember always asking him, like, Dad, why did we go to Vietnam? He's like, well, I'm like, never mind, forget it. If you can't just tell me, then never mind. So the author says that, today most experts assume and agree that Washington, D.C. and China are inevitably going to go to war with each other over a perceived idea of competition towards both empires. This will lead us to something Harvard teachers call the Thucydides trap, which is when a rising power threatens an already established one. They say that the Thucydides trap says that this means that war is likely.
Okay.
So in this scenario, the way I'm interpreting this is that the United States is an established power. We are seeing that China is...
They're ending their first golden age or gilded age right now.
So they're on the rise.
So this is from, I wish I remember her name. She was in Freakonomics, and she did like what you should know about China.
Okay, love
and
it.
It was awesome. It was like completely game
I need
changer.
to listen to that.
What she essentially said was, and I'm probably going to get all of this wrong, and that's fine. It's an entertainment podcast, first and foremost. So basically what she was saying is America has had like 2 or 3 gilded ages, right? We've had 2 ages of like coming up on the rise and doing great, and then some slumps. Like that's a traditional thing. If you play Civilization 6, you have to go through the dark ages and the golden ages. And that China is like 1 or 2 behind us. And so their corruption to us, she was looking at like measuring corruption. So she was saying like, they don't have more or less corruption than us. Their corruption is just different because they're like set back 1 or 2 gilded ages. And that if you actually compare it within that context, it is different, but it's not that different, which I found very interesting.
Okay. So this, like, from going off of what you said, then them being like 2 steps back from us, I think that a lot of politicians would perceive them as something as a threat.
Absolutely.
I think the last presidential presidential office was always talking about China.
Right.
So I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. Obviously, it's going to go great.
Well, okay, so like, I largely want to live like a simple life, and I love the ideas of both like communism, socialism, libertarianism. Like I love all the ideas. I just love ideas. And so like the idea of like everything simple and local is like so cool to me. Like everyone just takes care of each other. But the fact that we are so globalized has a benefit in that like even Russia can't just like outright declare war with the world because like their economy is tied so many layers and contradictions deep. So is China. So like neither China nor America would survive if there was just like a land war in Asia between the two, which is like maybe frustrating for politicians, but like I'm hella happy they're frustrated because that means they can't just do it or else they'll risk the whole economic structure we have to
different
collapse.
Things are going to happen, like gas prices are going to go up.
Yeah.
So
and like we just can't because there's no way that either side right now would risk their stock market just completely failing. And it would completely fail.
War is not going to be what it used to be.
No.
We're going to get into that, the future of what warfare is going to look like. But from right now, let's talk about civil wars.
Woohoo!
They are a doozy and typically leave deep scars that seep into the future. The losing side typically has a hard time admitting defeat for quite some time. Here in the United States, we still have people waving Confederate flags.
I saw one in Oregon.
Okay, there you go.
In Oregon.
We're going to get into it, bud. We're going to get fucking into it. Someone told me, this is a true story. It's so true that, like you were saying, where you have to withhold information so you can save it for a podcast.
Yeah.
I asked someone who was rocking a Confederate flag, and I felt comfortable enough with this person to ask this question. I said, "Can we unpack this for a second?" And they were like, "Yeah, dude." And I was like, "What's the impetus here? From my understanding, they lost. No?" This person said, Robert E. Lee didn't lose. He just ran out of supplies and troops. And I said, yeah, that's called losing, guy.
Yeah.
So I was, in my mind, so your infatuation is with Robert E. Lee? It's not with the Confederacy? What are you doing? And that's kind of what this topic is going into, is that civil wars leave everlasting scars.
Yeah, they won't go away.
They won't. These people walking around with a losing flag. Like, hey bro, do you also have a British flag in there too?
Right.
Like the people who lost the Revolutionary War? Are you going to be like, yeah, Britain, God save the Queen, woo! What do you do? I don't understand it. It's really hard for me to understand.
One, like, it clouds Southerners who are also trying to, like, because I think of, like, the band. Like, I love the band. I listen to the band all the time.
You're talking about the band that is named
The Band.
Okay, that's an important distinction to make.
We used to call ourselves The Band. That's from The Last Waltz. Martin Scorsese directed it. Lovely. Watch it every Thanksgiving, like a good American.
That's a good, that's a fun tradition.
Yeah, because they filmed it in Thanksgiving. Oh, man, I have a lot of memes to send you over The Last Waltz.
I need to watch it first.
Yeah, you need to watch it first, or else you won't get them. Anyway, they have a lot of songs. Live on Helm is from the South, and he has, like, so many of these songs that are about living in the South, and some of them are about the Confederacy, and they're not focused on the stupid parts, which is like Robert E. Lee is a saint. It's just like, you know, we grew corn and, like,
we drank whiskey.
Yeah, things were hard. We got murdered in the war too. And, like, I was like, oh, this is cool. It's like a sympathetic view of, like, just people living in this time period. It's not like trying to make heroics. It's not trying to, like, make saints out of historical figures, which is something I'm not interested in. It's just, like, trying to show me a glimpse into people that were alive and their ancestors are alive still. And I really like that. But it's so hard to, like, even bring up the topic of the South in the Civil War because it's been stained by, like, idiots that, like, wave Confederate flags and be like, the South will kill everyone again. Like, that's not even the same.
The South will rise again. Yeah, it's a doozy, dude. There's still civil wars going on throughout the world as we speak. Syria has a civil war, and there's a lot of civilians that are targeted, which we're going to go into. There's an entire chapter about civilians, which is pretty... I had to leave a lot of stuff out.
Did she talk about the difference between, like, a perceived civil war? Like, sometimes things are called civil war, and it's really, like, the Rwandan genocide. And so, like, there's no civil war there. Like, it's not the North and the South that have comparable forces.
Yeah, I don't think that... Do people consider that a civil war?
No, but, like, you know, but the other side clearly does. And so, like, that kind of stuff happens a lot.
No, she did not dive into that distinction.
Okay.
At least I don't remember that being a distinction.
Probably because it's just sad and, like, nothing really.
The civilians chapter was rough.
Really?
Like I said, there was a lot. I was like, I can't talk about this. So I get to name drop here. There is a general that she mentions called General Anthony Zinni.
Okay.
And I served with his, I believe, granddaughter.
Whoa, that's cool.
Sergeant Zinni. And he came to our skiff and basically talked a bunch of shit about Marines. He was like, Marines are okay. We're like, oh yeah, what? Anyway, this goes into General Anthony Zinni.
Wait, pretend I don't know what a skiff is real quick.
Oh, sorry. I apologize. Specially compartmented information facility. It's a building with no windows, and you need a clearance to get in.
Okay, so it's like a little think tank where you...
It's where a bunch of intel analysts hang out and make briefs.
Okay.
It is...
super fun? It sounds fun.
It's great. It's great.
You have ping pong tables there?
You do a lot of dumpster diving.
Yeah.
It's fun. That's a real thing, dumpster diving, to make sure you didn't accidentally throw out some, like... confidential material. Yeah. Anywho,
that's like a fun treat for after you finish your grueling labor.
I saw the Navy doing it more to fuck with people because their uniforms are white, and that's really that's like fucked up.
Yeah, and
the Navy has a special level of punishment that I will never understand. But anyway, so this talks about General Anthony Zinni. From making war games to find out specific things about war. So it says here in 1998, the American military spent a lot of time developing plans to defeat Saddam Hussein and testing them in war games. General Anthony Zinni, head of the United States Central Command with responsibility for the Middle East, later said, "It struck me that when we had a plan to defeat Saddam's army, we didn't have a plan to rebuild Iraq." He organized his own war. This is savage. He organized his own war game in 1999 and came to the conclusion that the invading forces would encounter considerable problems. The country was likely to fragment along religious and or ethnic lines. Rival forces would battle for power, and the Americans would face growing hostility. He figured that out from wargaming.
Awesome.
We didn't even go. We didn't even get attacked yet.
That's crazy. It's so cool. It's really depressing because no one listened to him.
This is about board games, so I love it. This is great.
No one listened to any of it. And, like one thing in Anti-Fragile that he's always bringing up, which I love, is he wants more skin in the game. And, there's no skin in the game for any, politician anymore or, analyst or, any, risk advisors. But for the military, there is skin in the game. You can't just make a proclamation as a general without it being attached to you forever. And he was like, I'm pretty confident in this. And so this can be attached to me. And he was right. And it didn't matter.
It gets better. So huge war games tested American forces' ability to defeat an unnamed Middle Eastern power. Okay. The American side had a clear advantage in advanced electronics, tanks, planes, and warships. Duh. The general in command of the much weaker enemy forces, however, rang his rings around his opponents. He kept radio silence and used motorcycles to deliver messages, so it made it difficult for his opponent's electronic surveillance to follow his moves. He had fleets of suicide bombers and speedboats knock out on paper 16 American warships. The Pentagon suspended the game partway through and rewrote the rules. The warships were miraculously resurrected, and the enemy general was so furious that he quit. He was like, "This is bullshit." He won the war game with basically the Iraq forces,
right?
And the Pentagon was like, no, and they rewrote the rules.
Right.
And he was like, "Well, then I quit."
Yeah. So for listeners that don't know, we'll cover wargaming itself eventually in a Hip Pocket series. We've been reading through some literature on it, but basically what we understand is that for this type of wargaming, it's not like a traditional board game where you sit at one table. You are in completely different rooms or buildings, and you have a whole council that are judges, and you bring ideas, and then the people with the ideas then run them through computer simulators that are deep thinking supercomputers it's super complex, and it involves a lot on the judges and who is mediating it, because they have to look at things like chance and trying to realistically use chance to show us what the unpredictable things are, the black swans. And this sounds like the judge got pissed and just cheated, which is that's the one golden rule is the judge has to be not connected to the game. So it's terrible.
It's like if you were to play, if anybody out there has played the Star Wars Rebellion game, and if you are the rebellion, it is damn near impossible to win the game.
Right.
It would be like if the first run through, whoever made that game, the rebels completely won, and be like, "Well, this is bullshit. We have to completely change the rules." Because the United States it's like, well, how would we not lose in this situation? And this dude clearly showed it by exploiting the simplicity of the Iraqi forces.
Yeah, he just was a nonlinear thinker.
Yeah.
But I hate that. The smartest people, because it's probably not the Pentagon, it's the Pentagon's research and development facilities, and they invented the 7th Cavalry, which we're about to cover in our Vietnam War. They have some very smart people. I've been reading some of their essays from that time period. They're awesome. They totally call out the Korean War failures and what tanks are and what they aren't. Anyway, I hate that they didn't take the lesson. They rejected the lesson and then reran the simulation.
Yeah, I don't like that.
It's horrible.
There's going to come a concept. There is a concept is going to come up here that reminds me of you and I, because you and I are very let's get down to brass tacks
Yeah.
here. Like, what are your resources?
Yeah, well, like,
What's your bean situation here?
how many beans do you have, friend? Well, because like in my mind, if I was running this, like when we play chess, like I don't just do it once; I do it a million freaking times to see how many times I can repeat it. So like, I would say like, yeah, we lost. We don't even need to finish this. Let's rerun it. Let's change a couple variables and see if we can do it better. And like stuff like that, like.
Yeah, don't just rewrite the rules.
This is
Because that's
stupidest, like-
realistic. We can just rewrite the rules of life. Yeah.
They're in charge of people's lives.
Yeah.
They get to decide when we kill people.
So when you study war and battles, it turns out that you are met with frustration.
I'm frustrated.
Yeah, it's very
That's the
frustrating.
feeling I'm having.
That's okay, buddy.
Sorry, I'm taking us off track.
No, you're good. That's a perfect segue to chapter 3. Ways and means.
This is the beans.
The bread and beans, buddy. So here I'm going to kind of go off, and I didn't really even have time to think about this. I just wrote the question, why did I join the military? Why does anybody join the military? Why do we always send the poor? Why do we always send the poor? It's a System
Great
of a
song.
Down. Thank you you got the reference, dude.
I've been listening to that one on my runs since we started the podcast.
That is a System of a Down song called BYOB. And the song starts off with saying, why do we always send the poor to war? So, yeah, why did I join the military? Well, short answer is I was kind of in I would say, a relatively poor family.
Okay.
I was not. Yeah, my dad filed for bankruptcy like twice.
Okay.
So,
Yep.
yeah. I knew that if I did stay around home and try to go to community college, I would have had to live with my parents for 2 extra years.
Right.
My choice was to either do that or get a one-way ticket out of my house and actually have like a decent paycheck, have housing, have food, have free healthcare. And I also wanted to be able to do something that when I looked back on my youth as like a young man, be like, oh, cool. Well, I joined the military.
Yeah.
I did that thing.
You did the thing.
I
And
had
when you grew up, you obviously watched that Marine commercial a lot.
the dragon.
The dragon thing, and he pulls out the sword on the bridge, and I'm like, woo!
It's a fun one.
And
It's a
my brother
classic
and
one.
I, every time, we're like, do only Marines get the swords? That was like a big question in my family as kids.
Not, do dragons exist? It was, who else gets the sword?
Just want the sword, please.
Yeah, I had my grandpa Goodwin, who fought in World War II. I admired highly, and I always admired like listening to him tell stories about war and things of this nature. So there was a romanticized aspect to it. So that's like a very short, above the surface level of like why I joined the military. Why does anybody join the military? Like why? These are questions that the author kind of wants us to ponder.
Yeah, they're good questions.
Young men, and they are almost invariably men, are brought up by their elders to value such qualities as discipline, bravery, and a willingness to die. And the epics they hear, the books they read, the songs they sing, or the paintings and sculptures they see, hold before them the examples of great warriors.
So you joined the military during the short-lived song Headstrong by Trapped.
Fuck.
So that must have been a big banger in the Marine barracks, I imagine, for Boots.
Headstrong will take you on.
You guys didn't listen to it in your barracks to pump you guys up? I would be listening to it. If I joined the Marines today, I'd be bumping that
I imagine
song.
you get your ass beat for doing some shit like that. No, I did not hear a lot of Headstrong. My buddy Alan said he used to write for the school paper when he was in college in Georgia, and I think he got to meet the band Trapped.
Oh, cool.
He said they're hella cool.
Yeah, they wrote like a hit, and they're like,
That
"This
was
is
it.
sweet."
Apparently, they capitalized on that
Yeah.
too. Apparently, one-hit wonder people, they know what's going on,
Yeah.
and they play their role. Technology and culture has only propelled industrial proficiency at war. So here she kind of goes into how culture and technology and war are so interdependent that it's kind of hard to say what drives what.
Right.
And then she also goes into the idea that there's a lot of men who believe that technology has arguably made the male ethos like weaker.
Okay.
And I put this next quote in here for your father-in-law.
Okay.
It says the Air Force pilots of today who lament that they are no longer needed in the cockpit have a forerunner in the Spartan leader who witnessed a stone hurled by a catapult bowl over a man and exclaimed, "Oh, Hercules, the valor of man is at an end." European armies clung to the cavalry long after it became clear that the horse and rider could not maneuver on the modern battlefield in the face of withering long-range fire. That's interesting to me. I just imagining how, what I think that's saying is, I imagine a lot of Air Force pilots are seeing the way technology is going with things like drones.
Right.
And they're like, fuck, if I were a kid today, I couldn't even necessarily aspire to be a pilot. I would have to aspire to be someone who controls a drone.
Right. Well, even when they were pilots, like in the 90s, there's only a couple fighters because they're so freaking fast. It's not like it was in World War II where, it's like prop planes and like, most of them will be flying, what are they, C-10s or whatever, like the big things that just drop supplies and drop people. Like that's what's really needed.
Yeah, like C-130s, I think they are.
Yeah, C-130. And like that's how you actually win wars and like conflicts is like
logistics.
Yeah, just drop
Yeah.
important things at important places.
Yeah, dogfights aren't happening.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's no dogfighting. It's like, I got my lock on.
Yeah, there's a reason that movies like Top Gun do so well is because they're like, shit, this is like basically Star Wars.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, so
but I love it. So instead of men being adaptable with like seeing that, because this we're going to talk about the cavalry stuff a lot when we go into Vietnam, because that's what the whole battle is about.
Yeah.
But just the idea of like these guys on horses and they're seeing like Jeeps essentially, and the Jeeps are hella fast and they have machine guns that can mow down horses because horses are too slow. And they're like, well, instead of adapting, my masculinity is too strong. I mean, fragile to handle any amount of critique or adaptation. So instead, I will just do the same thing and just die faster, I guess.
Wow. Huh. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where, I mean, you and I constantly talk about this, of where the generations are headed as far as how technology is affecting them. And I'm curious to see what the future fighting forces are made up of when technology makes people a little bit more, we'll say, peaceful. I mean, when you have all these creature comforts, you realize what's at risk when you go to things like war.
I appreciate that she didn't try to flatten the like complications of like the social and the political and cultural stuff. She said like it's impossible to separate them because I think it'd be really easy for her to put out whatever she feels,
Yeah.
But instead, she's just like, no, it would be inappropriate to. Like, I appreciate that as a writer, like that she really did try to do the right thing there.
She is a student.
Yeah,
she's a student of war. So. Chapter 4, folks. We've made it to modern war. And this is where I want to get into nationalism, which is the identification of people as part of something called the nation, which erupted into history. In the course of the 19th century, two further huge changes would join this first one and together make war more violent, deadly, and destructive. Nationalism was fostered by ideas, by the works of intellectuals, novelists, ethnographers, and historians, but it extended its impact downward into society and across Europe. and then the rest of the world thanks to mass literacy, cheap books, and rapid communications. The Industrial Revolution brought innovation and mass production and also stimulated social change. The middle and working class grew in size and eventually in power, while the old landed elites saw the sources of their wealth and their influence attenuate. So, modern war paved the way for people to understand that perhaps they had a say in who should go and fight rather than this succumbing to commands of an almighty ruler who most likely didn't go and fight in the first place. Nationalism gave people some agency within their country to realize that they kind of actually have a say in the outcomes of policy and politics, is what this book is kind of trying to say.
Interesting.
At first.
Yeah. In theory.
Right. Because, like, it's going into things like the nationalism being connected to really intense ideas that helped with things like the Industrial Revolution.
Right.
Which would obviously be a good thing. I mean, when you have people like Henry Ford who was lobbying for more roads,
right,
and more gas stations, that's when you have technology. This is where she's talking about the inner workings of technology pushing society and society pushing war, and all of these things kind of getting together in a soup to create this entire thing of society.
The literacy thing is interesting because that goes with Dan Carlin talks about that for Japan. 18th century Japan, the head of states, like the heads of state or whatever, like they redefined the Bushido Code. So the Bushido Code is like kind of like wasn't totally a thing, or it's at least not at all what we think it is. And because he's like, these were, tribal feudal samurai that used to fight for power, And then in the 18th century, they're like, let's take some of those ideas and just change them all to form a national identity. And they like took these like ancestors of samurai and were like, here's the new Bushido Code. Do that, but for selling plastic. And like that's how they like built up this fever of nationalism, is through picking a part of their past and then just like manipulating it. And then everybody gets to learn it. And then 2 generations later, you can have a nation ready to fight to the man.
Mm-hmm.
It's nuts.
Mm-hmm. Kind of want to change gears here with modern war and talk about how it paved the way to 24/7 news cycles.
Whoa.
Yeah. Newspapers and publishers realized that war was good for sales. In the Franco-Prussian War, for example, the circulation of London's daily news tripled. We also, to keep things topical since we got Vietnam coming up here, this was the first time that people in their living room saw the war from like a very personal perspective. I'm watching The Vietnam War by Ken Burns.
Give me your Ken Burns impersonation here.
Well, see, he doesn't narrate them. He has some other dude with a beautiful like.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I learned that because I was like, man, what does Ken Burns look like? And then I saw an interview. I was like, oh, he doesn't narrate this. Okay, got it. But there's a whole segment on just some of the stuff that's one of the reasons that Americans were not for the war, because they're sitting there watching Marines burn down civilians' homes.
Right.
And they're like, the fuck is going on here? So that's definitely one thing that modern war had, that things like, I mean, even World War II didn't have the same type of news coverage. No. Still news coverage, but they had to keep a lot of things out for classified reasons.
Yeah, what did they did the fireside chats or whatever, right? Instead.
Do tell.
Isn't that what's his face did, the president? And he
Truman?
No, who was before Truman?
Roosevelt?
Yeah, I thought Roosevelt did like fireside chats where he like gave you updates on the war every night on your radio.
Oh, cool.
I think so.
Maybe.
I might be super wrong on that. I'm gonna look it up.
This is an entertainment podcast.
Entertainment first.
I have a hilarious quote on modern war and why people go to fight from George W. Bush that I really appreciated in this book. War is terrible, but it brings out, in some ways it touches the core of Americans who volunteer to go into combat to protect their souls. Arrivederci. The fuck does that mean, dude?
What does that mean? Hey, yeah. Roosevelt did fireside chats in like 39s and 40, and he did like that was like his updates to America.
Like his little newsreel?
Yeah, it was like he was in your living room. It was like a big deal.
I like that.
Yeah.
Little
propaganda
brief.
after your ice cream.
That didn't happen instead we got things like the Nixon tapes and stuff from Vietnam. Oh,
but
man.
Then we get Dune.
I like Dune.
Dune's great.
War. What is it good for? Dune.
They gave us Dune.
It is safe to say that modern war has attracted different types of men and women. We live in a drastically increased creature comfort society where air conditioning and food are at our disposal.
Not for Spencer and I when we record podcasts.
It's hot in here, folks. How hot would you say it is, dude?
It has to be in the 90s.
My butt is sweating. But we do it because we love you.
Love you.
Much like Roosevelt and his fireside chats, we're coming to you live in your own ear holes. I shouldn't say holes. Things like drafts no longer exist because the need for massive amounts of men to participate in world wars is slowly decreasing. I find that concept that I was part of a war that was filled with nothing but volunteers pretty fascinating and kind of a cool flex. I don't know if I shared this on this show, but if I have, can you please stop me? I took a creative writing course in high school that was fucking horrible. And I had a teacher named, and I'm going to straight up name drop right now. Her name was Miss Landels at Rodriguez High School in Fairfield, California.
Shout out to Fairfield Unified.
Yes, the Flats, as they call it, home of the Jelly Belly. This teacher told my class that our generation didn't have a story.
Cool. It'd be cool if because sometimes I do that kind of stuff to purposely antagonize kids to do things like contrarian kids, like the kid in the back of the class, but it's kind of smart. And you're like, you won't do it. You won't write an essay on this.
It's a little different. Yeah, she used to call us schmucks, and she was a pretty horrific teacher. Like I said, she said that our generation was horrible and we didn't have a story.
Cool.
And I'm sitting here after having served in 2010 in a war that was completely done by volunteers, dude.
Yeah.
That's cool. I feel like that's a story.
There's a story there, absolutely.
Man, anyway, those are resentments that I have.
I filled out that stupid draft form when I was 18.
Oh, yeah, right. Well,
terrifying.
What is that called? There's a name for that.
I don't know. The worst morning of my life.
It's rough.
It was rough.
Because obviously there's a possibility if you're filling it out. That's a thing.
That's every time someone's like, it won't happen again. I'm like, but you don't have to sign the paper right now. You're too old for this paper to mean anything to you. For 15 years, it matters to me that I signed this paper.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. And so because there was a bunch of dudes who just volunteered, you didn't have to fucking worry about it.
Yeah. And I still appreciate that.
Yeah. No big deal. But, your generation doesn't have a story, Kevin. There's no story to your generation.
Nothing happened.
The millennials are useless.
9/11 did not change my world.
Nothing. It changed nobody's world. Security at the airport is a breeze.
It's great.
I do not have to show up to the airport 3 hours in advance to make sure that I get there to the plane on time. Chapter 5, Making the Warrior. Let's start off with a quote from Pericles. But the man who most truly can be accounted brave is he who best knows the meaning of what is sweet in life and of what is terrible, and then goes out undeterred to meet what is to come. That is so dope.
That's cool.
That to me just means like people who have experienced shittiness knows how to truly enjoy life and see what the real beauty in life is. That's some mad. I'm getting some stoicism vibes.
Yeah,
from
that's
that.
stoicism for sure. Well, because that's like a measurable thing, right? Like people say why some people keep volunteering for like crazy special forces stuff during like World War II and shit was just that they loved their lives in like the mornings when they're eating their food with their comrades. Like they loved it because they were never more alive than in that moment when they're just eating gruel with their buddies because they knew that they were probably going to die that afternoon. And so like it really gave them the measure. And like that's heavy to think about. Like,
it's
but
great.
that's the only way you could do it.
Yeah.
But it would be addicting.
We're going to get into that.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some concepts that we're going to get into as far as why the fuck are people doing these insane things that where death is clearly a high, there's a likeliness to it.
Right.
The reasons why individuals fight, bravely or not, fall into the same rough categories that those for groups including nations do. For gain, to defend themselves, or because of ideas and emotions. We can break them down still more. It is by no means an exhaustive list, but there are some reasons people have given for fighting. Because they have no choice, to protect their loved ones or their nation, out of a sense of honor, for fear of their officers, to win the approval of those they respect, to show off, to test themselves, to rape, pillage, and loot, for glory, for a cause, for their comrades, or to get ahead in the world. In peacetime, volunteers who join the military may not think of fighting at all, but rather of seeing the world or learning a useful trade. Those are reasons.
Yeah. I thought about joining when my brother joined.
Of course.
And I was like, I texted him, I was like, if they would take me as an officer that could work under you, like I would go right now. But like there's no way they want Kevin Parker at finishing grad school in Long Beach after 10 years in Long Beach. Like, how do you guys feel about really confusing political ideas that change every hour? Like,
hey, you'd fit in.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
There are some of the best, most interesting conversations I've ever had have been on post with dudes.
I just don't think I could finish because he was going on subs and that's what he wanted to do. And we were learning about like the interviews and stuff for Top Secret and above Top Secret. And I was like, I'm so bad at holding secrets and there's no way I'm allowed to do this. So I can't work with you.
Well, so not only that, but the longer you wait to get a Top Secret clearance, you're just increasing the amount of things you fucked up on.
Yeah, right?
It's like, oh, so why did you get this ticket on this day? You're like, oh shit, I must have been drunk. I don't even remember that.
They interview like all your old roommates.
Oh, dude.
Like,
oh yeah,
I can't do it just for my roommates. Like, they don't want to go get grilled by government officials. They specifically don't want that to happen.
No.
No one you went to college with.
The NSA is here. Should I hide my bong? Today's America's military typically enlists poor young men in rural and low-income parts of cities. The military does give those less fortunate a legitimate amount of opportunity to make a regular paycheck, free health care, food, a place to live, and oftentimes free college. That makes the military sound pretty lovely.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go to the recruiter and they're like talking about all the shit you're gonna get, that's when you're like, yay.
Signing bonus, I'll buy a Mustang.
You just explained like 65% of the military.
Dude, all of the reserve forces, because they all worked at the movie theater with me in downtown Long Beach, they all had some tricked out Mustang.
Love it.
And had no other money left.
Yeah.
And like every once in a while, they wouldn't be at work. I'm like, hey, you got to come to work. You barely make rent. And they're like, I'm also in the Army, I guess.
Yeah, reservists. That's the thing. Chapter 6, Fighting. No one has been able to capture in real... Excuse me. This is a quote. I should say that first. This is from the diary of an American soldier in the Pacific during the Second World War.
Yikes.
I feel like it shouldn't say that. If they were in the Pacific, it was probably from the diary of a sailor or a Marine.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, they could have been was it the 11th Infantry? Whoever Kennard.
Oh, Kincaid?
Yeah, Kincaid.
Kennard.
Didn't he have?
Oh, you might be right.
Yeah,
You
he
might
had
be right about
non-Marines there.
So maybe I'm wrong, folks, which happens.
Yes.
Quote, no one has been able to capture the real feeling of what combat is like. Many books have been written, hundreds of feet of film have been made, thousands of words have been spoken. All of these means have failed to give the true, horrible picture, the awful noise, the smell, and the fear that makes one stand up and scream out of horror that is pent up inside of you. And yet, under all this, there is really something beautiful about combat.
Yeah.
Question time. What is your favorite interpretation of like war or a piece of art that has come from war?
I think it's Bruce Springsteen's live album.
Tight.
I seriously
like
love his like little speeches he gives.
Was he in the military? Do we know?
No, so he it's in my family used to listen to the Bruce Springsteen live album, 1975.
Was that a thing you guys did?
Yeah, that's all we listened to. That or like Johnny Cash or Jimmy Buffett.
That's cool.
And he has this live album. It's like 4 CDs, and so we'd always like switch the CDs in the truck when we go camping and stuff. And he has like this interview or like he just talks to the crowd a couple times before he starts off on the river, which is his best one. And he talks about failing the draft. And, like, all of his buddies, like, the drummer of his first band is going. He doesn't know where it is. And, like, his dad's like, the Army's going to get you and make a man out of you. And then he fails, and his dad's like, that's good. Anyway, I listened to that song at the start of my run to get me, like, really, really pumped up. Because then he goes into the river all about, like, getting married, pregnant. And I'm like, woo, blue-collar life is rough. And then I go real fast.
I like that answer. Shit, I didn't even think about what, in my mind, I like as far as... I mean, yeah, I feel like you have to say some type of music, right? That Creedence Clearwater Revival, Fortunate Son album is solid.
So good.
I am inclined to say a movie, but after my brother and I tried to watch We Were Soldiers, kind of got a bad taste in my mouth.
Okay, well, so I will say the book on that is really lovely. Like, it really hit an emotional chord with me as well as, like, a logical one of like, you know, this is just interesting stuff. But I think it's because he had so much respect for the opposition he was fighting. Like they were getting sniped, and like the reports that the enlisted guys are writing out, and like the action reports, whatever you do after the battle, they're like, the snipers, you know, killed my best buddy, and like, damn good shot. And like the fact that they could like respect that guy was hiding in a tree for 2 days,
gallantry, bro.
Yeah, and like I was like, that kind of stuff really like hit a chord with me. Like, I don't understand any of this because I would be really mad. And he clearly was really mad, but he understood like, if I have to die, I'd rather die by like a guy who knows what he's doing and like earned it. And like, you can feel that a little bit when you play a sport, right? Like if I lose, I want it to be because someone freaking outplayed me and I still played my best game. I don't want to lose because I tripped, you know, like that's the worst way to lose. So like, maybe that book right now, but maybe just because I just read it, I don't know.
No, that's fine. That's an ever evolving concept. I mean, this Vietnam War documentary series by Ken Burns is insane. And to caveat what you were just saying about the book, I felt something very similar when they interview someone from the 7th Cavalry?
Yeah, 7th Cavalry.
They're like chilling on top of this hill, and one of the generals they interview him, and they're asking him, "How do you feel about the Viet Cong?" And he's like, "Worthy fighters, some of the best fighters I've ever seen. I'd love to have some on my side." And you're like, "Oh, that's tight." Like,
yeah, they would,
right?
They would have.
Yeah, you typically from like movies,
right?
You typically get them just saying a bunch of racist things and trying to hate on them, and you get these commanders being very respectful.
Well, even in the books, when they are saying the racist stuff, they're also showing, like, you know, it's such a complex thing. Like,
so you're saying, don't get me wrong, there's definitely still racism,
but like for the time period, I don't know, like they have to hate them a little bit, but those are just the words that they were using. But they are also like, I'm not gonna say the words, but like they are like yeah, that racist slur was a damn good shot. Like, that's a confusing sentence,
Well,
sir.
It's the same thing with sports.
Yep.
People talk
Yeah.
shit to the other side
hey,
too.
Yep.
Let's talk about how folks in the military cope with seriousness and sadness on the warfield.
Okay.
Drinking and drugs can have similar effects in helping warriors prepare for battle and deal with it afterward.
They locked up after that battle of they locked up all their weapons because they knew they were all gonna get hammered.
Fucked up. That's smart.
Yeah, I was like, way to think ahead.
Yeah, that's really smart.
Whoever their armory guy was like, I'm gonna just go ahead and lock this one up.
The British Army, like many continental ones, used to give their troops strong drafts of brandy or rum. In Vietnam, the American soldiers took drugs to dull their fears. In his recollection of the First World War, Lu Su describes how Italians were once nearly overwhelmed by the waves of brandy fumes coming from the Austrians as they attacked. Holy shit, they smell like drunks. There's also a story of in World War I, they used to take dead bodies and prop them up and put cigarettes in their mouths and pretend to play like poker with them.
Nice. World War I seemed to have a really positive impact on the world. Like, I don't totally believe in like total collective unconsciousness, but like I think that it scarred the entire human psyche.
Bro, as we start to do when we do our current conflicts and I start to dig deep into why these stateless groups are mad, I'm like, oh, World War I fucked this all up.
For everybody.
Even Vietnam, when you look at the French and trying to colonize Vietnam, you're like, oh, World War I, no.
Well, we did get the Lord of the Rings.
That's true. Look at you, dude. You're bringing the positive to all of this.
The Lord of the Rings was a really nice
Dune,
thing.
Lord of the Rings.
Whenever I think of Nixon, I think of Dune now. I'm like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah, that's his favorite president.
Yeah.
Have you heard the term hurry up and wait?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a huge concept that she kind of goes into in the book, that a lot of the act of fighting isn't really fighting at all. It's really just waiting around. I was a huge fan of the book Jarhead in high school, written by Anthony Swafford, which is really a book about doing all this preparation for war and then going overseas and not using any of those preparations.
So I walked into that movie blind at like 18 or 19, whenever it came out, and I thought it was going to be like 300.
An action movie.
And I was like the whole time like, but when do we fight people?
No, it's not. That's not what it's about.
Yeah. And in retrospect, at the end, I was like, that movie made me feel weird. But like now I'm like, the movie's dope. That movie really tried to make you feel it.
It's a Sam Mendes movie, dude.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Cool.
I really kind of liked, especially the writing about him just talking about being bored and lefted versus right-handed masturbation and, you know, all the things that you do when you're fucking bored. And just let me tell you, like, when I look back at things like deployment, I remember the airport, how long it took to go through customs. Right. Just flying there was a long process.
Yeah.
That nobody thinks about. They just think they're there.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, we're at war. No, dude. Such a long fucking process. It's not even funny.
I think about it a lot, and then I'm glad I didn't try to get into active combat, because with my ADD, like, I can't really be bored these days. Like, I just get too interested in things.
What do you do when you get bored with ADD?
I just like start looking at, because my ADD is inattention. So like, I guarantee you, if I was like one of the gunners and nothing was happening, I'd have a hard time sitting there staring. I'd be like, oh, I wonder what type of rock that is. Let me think of every rock type I know. And then like, I'd just be way in my own world. And it wouldn't go well for my platoon. I'd be real sorry about that.
Well, at least you're conscious of this.
Yeah.
I remember there was a checkpoint in Afghanistan where we had a fly swatter and we had a marker, and we used to tally all the flies that we killed. Bro, the entire outpost was just tally marks. It was comical. It was comical how many tally marks there were. There was thousands. The entire thing
and
was
it
filled.
didn't used to be that way. Like, right, we talked about that in our Thermopylae series. Like, it used to be, I mean, there was still the hurry up and wait, but it was like march, and then you battle all day, hand to hand, and then it's done. Whereas then World War One happened, and it was sit in a trench and be scared. And I think that messes with you more. Like, I almost would rather let's just get it over with at some point, right? Like, I'm gonna die or not, and I'd rather know.
This book talks about how bored I think it was I believe it was the United States. They wrote a letter in the trench to their loved one back home, talking about how shitty the experience was and that they wanted to go home. And they sent the letter out, but it ended up on the other side of the trench to the Germans. And the Germans read it, and they felt a connection.
Yeah.
And they were like, oh, dude, we feel the exact same way. And they responded to the letter and sent it back over to the other trench, just kind of showing this like community aspect of we're on different sides, but we're going through the same thing.
Yeah, it's almost a form of trauma bonding, which is crazy.
That's a good way to put it. Most of what men miss about war is the people they meet and the camaraderie. There's also a level of excitement to that the normal civilian life just doesn't really provide. She talks about the scene in the Hurt Locker. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's about an EOD tech in Iraq, and every day is just so intensely thrilling, and he might die at any second just taking apart all these bombs.
Yeah.
He comes home and he goes to the store and he's trying to pick a cereal, and it just shows him staring at all the different cereal boxes. And then the next scene is him re-enlisting.
Oh man.
He's just like, fuck this.
Yeah.
Like, I don't, this is boring to me. This is dumb. So yeah, it's just one of those things where.
Did you feel that at all?
No.
Did things make... Okay, because when you're in the military as a young man, the world seems like it has order, right? Like, there's a rule for everything in the Marines, and you have 8 commanders in a hierarchy, and then you go to the civilian life, and it's just like super weird, and like rules kind of matter.
Dude, that's why a lot of people don't get out.
Yeah, I just wondered, like, how was your
transition?
Yeah, like, how did that?
Not great.
Oh no.
No.
Sorry.
Well, it wasn't great just because there was a lot of, I think, I definitely resented myself for having not gone to college.
Right.
And by the time that I'm getting out of the military, all my friends are like finishing up college.
Right.
And I'm like, fuck. So I'm kind of behind here now, and I'm starting to see the results of my actions.
Right.
I'm now good now, and I'm really super happy that I got the GI Bill.
Right.
And now I'm at an age where I did have the what is that called? It's this really, really, really easy word. Discipline. I now have the discipline to actually go through school, which when I was like 19, I would have drank the entire time.
Right.
I would have partied and been like, oh, cool. You can just like do ecstasy whenever you want.
Right.
Like, no,
there's no real rules anymore.
You don't like have to take a piss test to go to class. Like, what? So, I would say when I look back at all the things that I do miss, and this probably has a lot to do with like the family I grew up with, which is like my family was kind of a bunch of assholes. Like that's the way we like spoke to each other, just very bluntly. I would say like a huge thing that I miss still to this day is like the anti-fragility of it all.
Right.
And like how people spoke to each other just so blatantly, and talking shit was a way of bonding. There's very dark humor to it that I really liked, that I don't see in like now. And we've talked about this before, but when you phase out and you have to go through these classes, they're like, hey, maybe don't say the F word every sentence.
Right.
Here's how to be a normal person. So that's when you have to kind of come to terms when you're a 22-year-old getting out, like, oh, so I wasn't really living a normal life.
Right. Okay, so it doesn't hit you till you start transitioning
You're
out.
falling asleep with a rifle next to you every night. I still technically have dreams. I still have dreams every once in a while where I'm wandering around Afghanistan. I'm like, what the fuck is my weapon, bro? I lost it. Are you serious?
Yeah.
Panic mode. So shit like that. I heard a little, and who knows how true this is, but I heard someone say that, people who were in the Air Force, it takes them like 10 years after they get out to like get rid of all the habits that they picked up in the Air Force. Okay. The Navy, something like 15 or 20 years, Army, 30 or 35. And then for the Marine Corps, it takes like 75 years to get some crazy shit like that. But yeah, I mean, same thing when you probably look back at college and you remember the late nights just kind of standing in someone's kitchen, drinking and having really cool conversations. Right. Same shit in the military. Yeah. Just, talking, finding out who you are, finding out who everyone takes a different route to find out who they are. And some people just join the military.
Yeah, it makes me think of like going to biker bars, like shout out to the Liquid Lounge in Long Beach for their terrifying experiences, but nice ping pong table in the back.
The Liquid Lounge.
Yeah, it's called Liquid Lounge.
Is it still around?
Oh, I assume so.
Okay. Dive bar.
It's fantastic. But you meet interesting people there. And I remember being like, this is formative for me.
Yeah. I feel like Hemingway.
This is good experiences. I need to be checked on this.
Yeah, that's dope. See, I like shit like that. Let's talk about civilians.
Let's talk about us.
Let's talk about civilians, baby. Instead of sex. Let's talk about
I like it.
All right, anyway. So I remember going up and visiting my grandpa in Oregon who would watch MASH religiously. And I remember we watched an episode where this doctor was operating on someone and they were chatting it up about war. And this doctor said that war is worse than hell. And he says that, in war, innocent people die, children die, all the time. And he says, does that happen in hell? And my grandpa, who was a devout Christian, said, that's true. So I just think that that's kind of an interesting little concept that civilians really probably are the worst collateral damage in all of this. Right. Most of the time. Sometimes when you have things like the Industrial Revolution and World War II, you have a bunch of people back home working. Right. And helping feed the military industrial complex. So she says here that war is not invariably bad for civilians. They can benefit, whether through sharing in the spoils of victory or finding better opportunities to make money, get ahead, or break taboos. Yet civilians are also war's innocent victims, paying the heavy penalties of defeat in the coin of starvation, murder, rape, slavery, forced labor, or mass deportations. This is the chapter where I kind of had to leave a lot out.
Yeah. Feel great so far?
My mind kind of goes to Civil War and how people have to kind of pick sides. Yeah. My mind kind of went to a lot of the divisiveness that our country's kind of recently been going through, where, when you hear someone voted for a particular person, where they're like, well, then fuck that guy. Right. And it's like, shit, man, we're going to really base our friendships and our lives because of like whoever somebody votes for. Yeah. That's sad to me that we've gotten to that part. And like, even my father-in-law was just like, that gives me mad Civil War vibes. Right. Lots of generals in the past thought that the more that they attacked civilians, the more likely people would be to surrender. They're like, stop fighting.
That's a dark equation that they're doing.
But I understand conceptually, I get it.
Yes.
So now, and we're going to start kind of morphing into this discussion a little bit, but technology is kind of changing the face of warfare and its target on civilians with targeting people online, like Facebook and the spread of disinformation, to like that whole swatting thing that we learned from that show on Netflix. There was a she has here a top secret discussion memorandum that was put out from Sir Arthur Harris, which was the chief of Britain's bomber command. Winston Churchill was also a part of this. It says here that the destruction of German cities, the killing of German workers, and the disruption of civilized community life throughout Germany, the destruction of houses, public utilities, transport and lives, the creation of a refugee problem on an unprecedented scale, and the breakdown of morale both at home and at the battlefronts by fear of extended and intensified bombing are accepted and intended aims of our bombing policy. That's Britain, dude.
Yeah, so listeners that are not fully entrenched in this topic of the bombings in Germany need to go read Slaughterhouse-Five, because the firebombing of Dresden and Kurt Vonnegut are close friends, and it's terrible.
Was he a German?
No, but he was an American who was captured. He was a POW in Dresden, I believe. And he was put in a basement when they firebombed Dresden.
What?
I think so. That's Slaughterhouse-Five. It's a different character, but I think that really happened to him.
Whoa!
I know that he was like a POW.
So he was in the military. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why I sent you his letter where.
Yeah, dude, that was dope.
Yeah,
that was fucking. We should send that to me so I can put it on our social media. There's a letter from. Is it Vonnegut's dad?
No, it's Vonnegut. For his son. His son was being conscripted.
So Kurt Vonnegut wrote a note to the government, essentially being like, I've seen war and I know what it's done, and I'm not saying I'm a coward, but like my son doesn't need to go do that shit. I've done enough for this country to know that no thank you. It was really well written and fucking epic.
It was epic.
While Kevin is looking that up, we're moving on to chapter 8 here, folks. We've almost reached the end. If you've made it this far, you've learned a lot about war. Chapter 8 is about the controllable and the uncontrollable. So this chapter is really about like the Geneva Convention and how war is such a chaotic and awful thing, but has legitimate like collegiate and like organized manners with which humans try to practice, such as things like the rules of engagement. We also have, when we're talking about the controllable and the uncontrollable, if for those of you who listened to our Thermopylae series, you had, King Leonidas sacrificing animals so that he could get good omens in order to go into battle. So we're always trying to place these controllable rules on the battlefield to help us with what's going to happen. You do have what scholars that have made in the West call ius ad bellum and ius in bello, which is the laws governing the initiation and justification of war, and the second those the way it's conducted. A big, for instance, again, is when before I went to Afghanistan, we had the rules of engagement drilled into our brains. When I arrived in Afghanistan, we had the rules of engagement drilled into our brains. I used to work at Friendship Gate, and I had a bus blow past me, and I had a moment where I could have, if I did not have proper training, I would have shot the bus. Right. But instead, as the dude saw me in his rearview mirror, and we made eye contact, and I gave him like a stop signal, and he stopped, and everything was fine. Because I had the rules drilled into my brain so much that, like, hey, if you shoot a bullet out of your gun, you better answer for that.
Right.
This isn't Rambo.
Right. So overall, you think, so at least in this one instance, the rules of engagement saved an innocent person's life.
Yeah.
That's great.
I think that's the
that's the point of it, right?
That's the whole thing here, is that she's trying to talk about the paradox of how war is so chaotic and crazy, yet we have things like the Geneva Convention, rules of engagement. People go to war colleges.
Right.
people go to the Naval Academy and do very, very formal things for something that is so informal.
Right. That's crazy. Well, and like, life still goes on in the battlefield. You know, like, people still got to bake bread, and like it can't stop, and it shouldn't stop. Like, those people have to live their lives.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Hopefully not be murdered.
Question to ponder. Is it a just war when a nation, feeling that it might be threatened in the future, decides to wage a preventative war in the absence of an immediate threat? No.
Yeah.
That's my answer. No.
It's one of those, like, I've been burned before. Like,
right.
Big if true.
Right. Exactly. Just let me reword the question here. If you think that there's a future possible war, can you initiate a war because you think that something is possibly going to happen in the future? So that would be like me right now taking an Advil because I might have a headache in an hour or two.
Right. But then, like, okay, so I'll play devil's advocate just
Please
for
do.
fun. Your daughter, what if I said, I had a confidence interval that was like fairly high, and I said, like, that California is going to be hit by something, and we know where it's going to be hit from. Like, can you separate your emotions because, like, it's not a done deal? Or do you look at, like, the measurement? Or do you, like, I could see a lot of people taking the emotional route. I know a lot of people in our friend circles that if I just said that at all, that there was a risk that your daughter would be hit, that they would be like, oh, well, then let's just go get them first just in case.
Well, that's the whole question. That's the question to ponder.
What a question.
Yeah. A moral quandary, perhaps.
I think for me, I'm in the, who said it? Was it Whitney Houston? When she was being interviewed, and they were like, you spent $2 million on crack last year. And she's like, show me the receipts. Like, my whole thing is, like, after the war on terror and the weapons of mass destruction debacle, like, I feel like you could probably rile me up for something like that, or at least like sanctions, but I need to see those receipts this time. Like, I got to know what your measurement is and like what your data set is. And
before you, I mean, yes, because the question here is like, is it a just war?
Right.
Which we now know it is not,
right,
from experience. Chapter 9. We're getting to the beginning of the end here.
Kurt Vonnegut was a POW in Dresden as it got firebombed and stayed in the slaughterhouse.
So he was in the army?
Yeah.
Man. So that's another thing war contributes to, folks. Really good authors.
That might be my favorite war book. That book really touched me. Like,
I think World War II was my favorite war.
Well, I just think, like, we were talking about art from after conflict.
Oh, I got you.
And so, like, that book really did, like, open my eyes to, like, one, how you can mess with, like, plot diagrams, and, like, how you can mess with book structures, because the whole book is nonlinear. Like, he jumps back and forward in time the whole book, which is awesome. And Tralfamadorians Dorians being, like, plungers with eyeballs is hilarious, and I love it.
The punk rock in me in high school absolutely adored Farewell to Arms by Hemingway. That was pretty, like, a dope fuck the system book. I really enjoyed that.
You read Farewell to Arms and then joined the Navy. Not Navy, Marines, sorry.
Yes,
man, I'm going to get beat up for that.
No, you're good. It's a huge contradiction that I joined the Marine Corps.
I kind of like that more. I like that you were like...
Do you like that?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
It makes you complex.
All my teachers who knew that I hated authority were like, I would love to see how this plays out for you. Chapter 9, War in Our Imagination and Memories. Here we got a quote from Tim O'Brien, who wrote The Things They Carried, which is a novel about Vietnam.
Yep.
But he was also actually in Vietnam. Yep. Quote, in a true war story, if there's a moral at all, it's like the thread that makes the cloth. You can't tease it out. You can't extract the meaning without unraveling the deeper meaning, and in the end, really, There's nothing much to say about a true war story, except maybe, oh. I
Wow.
fucking love that.
Yeah. That we read usually like in high school curriculums. Like we use the things they carried a lot, or in like college.
Awesome book.
Yeah.
Awesome book.
I don't think I read the whole book. Only like sections of it.
How dare you?
I know.
But that kind of just reminds me of, I remember, this is me speaking as an intelligence analyst that was in Afghanistan talking to other intelligence analysts. And I remember we were like in the smoke pit, like halfway through our deployment thinking, wait, why are we here? The fuck are we doing here?
Yeah.
A lot of huge question marks there.
How'd you go back in? So like my issue when I think about like doing something like a big commitment, like joining the military is like even teaching, like what I like is that I'm on a year-to-year contract. So if I'm ever like, this ain't what I signed up for, I could just go do something else. But how do you go from that? Like you're in Afghanistan, like you can't leave. And so you got to go back in there and do your job. Like how did you guys rally or just suck it up?
Yeah, you sign a contract. You have no choice. But it's interesting that you say that because I was the king in high school of, and just as a person, my character was that could not finish anything.
Okay.
I, in high school, would do all of the conditioning for sports and then never try out.
Oh my God.
I know. Everyone's like, so you did the worst part of the sport? Like, that makes no sense. I was just the king of it. So one of the reasons I joined was because I knew I would have to do it.
Oh, okay.
I knew it would force me to continue to finish out something that was like considered respectful and, you know, admirable, I guess, to some folks, depending on who you ask. I have an interesting question here. So art helps humanity deal with war, right? And I'm going to ask us, what is a current era piece of art that does a good job at portraying the 20-year Afghanistan war? Do we have one yet? What should it be? What would a memorial in DC look like for that?
It's not The Bachelor? Is that not what that show's about?
No. But that is a good answer.
Thanks. I don't know. I feel like there's like a big question mark.
So, have you been to DC?
No.
So, I've seen the World War II Memorial, which is pretty epic. I've seen the Vietnam Wall, also epic. I've been to Arlington Cemetery. And I really am curious to see if what comes about from Iraq and Afghanistan, like what kind of memorial would come from that. The kind of thing here is like, obviously when people think of Vietnam, they think of the music.
Right.
When people think of World War II, I think they just kind of think of, I think a lot of people definitely romanticize just the machines behind it all. Right. People get really into the weeds with the types of planes and ships that came out of that era. I don't necessarily think the Korean War really. There's a Korean War memorial in DC.
Yep.
But I don't know. I'm curious to see if anything comes from this, or if people are gonna, or because the thing is, after Vietnam happened, nobody really talked about it.
Right.
It was kind of like having a drunk uncle where everyone was just like, shh, we don't talk about that. We're now kind of at a place where there's some leeway to talk about it, not necessarily with the veterans themselves, but like as a country.
Yep.
Where we can kind of talk about our mistakes. I don't know. I mean, are we at a time right now where no one really talks about it?
You know, I'm trying to think like, so there have been changes. And so like, I would like to see something about like, you know, a coming together, like a joining of worlds between us and the Middle East. Like, it has forced us to learn more about the Middle East. In 7th grade now, they teach the 5 pillars of Islam.
Do they?
Yeah, because you have, whether you like what's going on in the Middle East or you don't, it's a part of our world now.
You know what? I think I did learn about that in the 7th grade.
I didn't. I learned about the last shogun. Like, I learned about feudal Japan. Like, we did like world history, but like, I don't think, at least, that I learned the 5 pillars of Islam and like I learned about world religions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so cool now. Like, it's a positive. Like, we're forced to reconcile that there are religions other than Christianity,
Right.
and it's important
Very.
that no matter what your religion is, if you're an American, you should know it because you are interacting with it.
Yeah.
Even if it's, by proxy of a soldier.
Pretty sure there's something in the Constitution about freedom of religion. At least,
Yeah.
Is that a rumor or?
It's a whole other thing.
That's Are war cemeteries good? Do we as a society deal with war in a healthy manner, or do we simply glorify it?
That's hard.
It is hard because truth be told, I don't really like how, because I love The Punisher, the comic book and the show and the movie and all that stuff. And the whole point of him wearing the skull is as a memento mori, to like remember death.
Right.
And to remind him that you will die and that death is what brought him to the point of where he's at. And people slap it on their trucks and they're just like, Texas. It's like, bro, that's not the point of what that skull means. Like, that kind of bothers me. I don't like that. I don't think that's a healthy manner of,
It did, like, going to the one near Reading for Memorial Day, it was sobering seeing the fields. And knowing that was just one small one in, middle of freaking nowhere, and knowing that they are all over the country, like, it did help me, like, have some gratitude the rest of the day. Like, I went home and I was just like, this is a real thing people did. Whether they all believed in all of the causes or not is irrelevant. The fact is that people are actively trying to do this, so.
It's cool. So it provided you with perspective.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah. I would be curious to see where people glorify it. I don't necessarily see a lot of that where we live.
Well, it's interesting because, you and I are operating kind of on that truism, the like, hate the war, love the soldier. But I could see how your question is important because we could go too far in that, like, soldiers aren't blameless, like, their soldiers have done naughty things and they should be, held responsible for that. And Halsey was a real soldier who I do not like specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Conclusion.
Wait, where are you standing on that?
Oh, you want to know where I stand on that?
Yeah.
Well, so yeah, I have a different perspective, and I feel like as though I'm slightly biased because I was in the military.
Right.
So for me to go to a military cemetery and see things like that, I'm like, oh, it's nice that people still kind of care.
Yeah.
That's where I'm kind of at. It's comforting. That's why I was kind of saying, like, what do you think Washington, D.C. will do? I'm really curious to see what the history books are going to say about it. Yeah, but I'm also hoping that this turns into us really going more towards actually doing humanitarian efforts rather than being like, we should build a democracy.
Right.
It seems like any time that the United States declares a war on something, we really fuck it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're very good at it.
Declaring war on things?
Yeah, or just like messing up, destabilizing. I have this big old book on Blackwater here. Turns out.
Yeah, we're going to get into that at some point.
Turns out some of it's not cool.
Looks like you and I have just endless content, sir. Yeah. We're going to be here a while, folks. Let's conclude this. Yeah. Let's wrap it up. It is possible, at the very least, to identify trends in war. The future, like the present, will hold two levels of war. The one employing professional forces and high technology, with all the power of advanced economies and organized societies behind them. And the other will be fought with loosely organized forces using low-cost weapons. She makes an example here that says...
That's interesting.
The President of the United States could technically bomb all of Afghanistan and get rid of all of ISIS, but will still not be able to keep American citizens free from threats.
Right.
No matter what you do and how many bombs you drop and how much money you spend, there's still going to be problems. Which kind of is going to what I was saying earlier of like, maybe instead of trying to like fight something, we should try to help something.
Yeah. Ask them what they think would be.
The enemy is now becoming more and more difficult to identify. There is an elusive enemy constantly patrolling the internet, preying on bored and vulnerable people who don't sit around and study history and war like Kevin and I do. They are provoked by emotions, which typically end up in mass insurgencies and insurrections, such as the one on January 6th, perhaps? Question mark. That's just my take on it. So here's her kind of little closing thesis here. Margaret MacMillan says eloquently, "We need to pay attention to war because it is still with us. We need to know about its causes, its impact, how to end it, and how to avoid it. And in understanding war, we understand something about being human, our ability to organize ourselves, our emotions and our ideas, and our capacity for cruelty as well as for good. We fight because we have needs, because we want to protect what we hold dear, or because we can imagine making different worlds. We fight because we can. But that long intertwining of war and society may be coming to an end, or ought to, not because we have changed, but because technology has." Ladies and gentlemen, that is War, How Conflict Shaped Us by Margaret MacMillan. So I thought that was kind of a good little start for our little book reports. Like, I think that kind of does a nice little broad
I liked it.
Scope of what war is, how it makes us human, which is really, again, typically Kevin and I really zoom in on specific aspects of war. And this is a kind of a different little approach here. Tell us your thoughts. Tell us if you like this.
Yeah.
Hit us up on Friendster.
How many stars did you give this out of 5?
This book?
Yeah, on Goodreads. You went on Goodreads and rated it.
I actually do that.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
So don't judge me. You know, it's not necessarily like it's super palatable. So for someone who were to just be starting off kind of like you and I are, I think it's great. I don't think it's groundbreaking.
Right. She's not like really doing hot takes.
No, I don't. I think that she's just trying to provide context.
Right.
As to like, if someone were sitting around and being like, thinking to themselves, what in the fuck do we fight for?
Right.
If they read this book, they could have a decent conversation with someone explaining why human beings feel the need to fight, given history, a little bit of science thrown in there, how technology has evolved, how we have evolved, and how societies have formed over the past and created, for you and I are huge on resources.
Yep.
So like, do you know what the main one in Vietnam is? There's 2.
The main resources in Vietnam?
Yeah, that they had at their disposal. Like,
I don't know.
We got rice and we got rubber.
I was going to say rice.
Rice and rubber were Vietnam's main resources.
I only knew rice because of how not every guy in the People's Army carried a pot. And so when they would hike, they'd have to stay in groups because they'd all have dried rice. And so then one guy would have the pot, and then he would light the pot and boil the water for the rice. Kind of cool.
Yum.
Probably really good.
Oh, dude. Yeah, I'm sure Vietnam. I want to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, I'd love to go to Vietnam.
Yeah, we should do it. We should have a live episode from Vietnam.
I would not like to time travel to Vietnam. That'd be on my no if I could time travel.
Oh no. Oh no, I would not like to time travel either. Anything else?
No. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening, folks. We will be heading to Vietnam shortly, so mentally and spiritually prepare for that.
Yeah.
Other than that, bonsai.
Bonsai.